What is up, my dashing dudes? I am the Hans TV, and today we're diving back in to a subreddit we do ever so often on the channel. It's r/ProRevenge. Our first post for the day comes from Beer Belly Be Gone. Mess with my kids? That's gonna cost you a pretty penny and get you in trouble with the law. So I've got an acquaintance who's known as Richard, who has always been of the I know better than you school of thought. What makes it worse is that he literally received his PhD in physics from one of my country's top universities about 6 months ago. So he's not a dummy. The problem is that he thinks that because he's a physics genius, that means he knows better than everyone about everything. Just an example, my kids are in Montessori schools. This is a decision my wife and I reached together, and we're very happy with it. When he heard, he went on a 30-minute rant/lecture about how we're throwing away our money, and Montessori is nonsense. When I told him that I had read and even professionally translated studies proving the opposite, and gave him some real-world examples, Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, Sergey Brin, Jeff Bezos, Larry Page, etc., he still would not admit he might not be 100% correct. Not the subject of this revenge, but so you understand the person we're dealing with. Another thing that is important to note is that Richard does not have Asperger's or anything similar. We joke about this all the time, and he's been tested from here until next week. He's just a really smart, socially oblivious pain in the butt. Given all of the above, I try to limit my time with him, but unfortunately, that isn't always possible. And last week we were both at the same group braai for a friend, Jack, who was visiting back from overseas. I've known Jack since grade school, so we brought our families and made it more than just a long time no see type of thing. At some point later on in the afternoon, my eldest, awesome less than 10-year-old, came to me really sad and said she wanted to go home. When I asked her why, she said that Richard had just spent 15 minutes telling her that she shouldn't eat hot dogs because they're unhealthy, and he explained what went into hot dogs and what they're made out of. Awesome is not a vegetarian, but knows that the beef and chicken she eats used to be live animals, and has never professed interest in vegetarianism. At the same time, when a kid is eating a hot dog, they don't care or want to know what's inside. We spoke a bit, I calmed her down, and I told her to ignore Richard and go play with her siblings and her friends. Being a kid, she was thankfully easily distracted by something else and moved on. I didn't want to make a fuss with Jack or Richard, so I just let it be. This turned out to be a mistake. About 30 minutes later, I heard Awesome scream and begin crying. I ran over to her. Richard had come up to her and knocked her hot dog out of her hand, saying she shouldn't eat that garbage. I handed Awesome over to my wife for damage control, and I took Richard aside and told him that A, you don't ever talk to a man's kids without permission, B, you don't ever teach a man's kids without permission, and C, you sure as heck don't ever touch a man's kids without permission. He doesn't have kids, so I still wanted to give him a benefit of the doubt. This turned out to be a mistake. Instead of doing the mature thing and moving on, he decided to double down on the hot dog issue. This was the hill he was going to die on. My kids shouldn't be eating hot dogs. Keeping Jack in mind, I disengaged and told him to stay the F away from my family. For the rest of the RV, I kept my eye on him, and he didn't come near them. Jack enjoyed, we all ate some good meat, end of story, as far as I'm concerned. This turned out to be a mistake. A few days later, we received a visit from Child Protection Officer who claimed that we were neglecting our kids, specifically Awesome. She came in and saw that while the house could have been cleaner, what house with kids is spotless, everything was fine. She sat with Awesome for a few minutes and asked her some questions, said everything was fine and left. First thing I did was call a friend of mine who is a lawyer, just to be on the safe side. He said it looked to him like we're in the clear, but we should keep in touch with him just in case. Next, I began working the grapevine. It turned out that Richard had been offended by how I treated him after the hot dog incident, so he filed a false anonymous report. Being Richard, and never thinking he could ever be wrong, he was even talking about it, as if people should be proud of him for what he did. I had to make sure though, so the last thing I did before dropping the hammer on him was confronting him personally. I set my phone to record and went to his house. He doubled down yet again, saying we were torturing Awesome. He's the one who called protective services on us, and he'd do it again in a heartbeat. This turned out to be a mistake. I am not the violent type, but I swear I wanted to break the SOB in half. I told him that if he ever came near myself or anyone in my family again, I'd have a restraining order put out on him, and I'd make sure every single one of our shared acquaintances knew why. I listened to the recording in my car, and his admission that he filed a false report came out as clear as day. I immediately forwarded it to my lawyer, who said he'll get the ball rolling with some friends of his with the public prosecutor to see if we could get Richard in trouble, using his admission. Still waiting on that. The wheels of justice turn slowly sometimes. Then I enacted my actual revenge. See, after he got his PhD, Richard bragged about the new flat he'd be moving into as soon as he sold his current flat. To that end, he renovated most of his current flat, including putting lots of new and expensive features that required lots of electrical work. He did the same on his new flat. He did most of the electrical work himself, which is a big no-no unless you're licensed. I called an inspector on both of his flats, who asked to see certification on who did the electrical work. Obviously, there was no certification. It wouldn't surprise me if Richard, being Richard, began arguing with the inspector that his work was good enough, and he didn't need to pay someone else to do it for him. I haven't seen or spoken to Richard since, but I've heard that he had to bring a certified electrician to examine every single change he made in both flats. This meant dismantling everything and having it inspected. Turns out, the buyers of his old flat weren't happy with the delay in receiving the keys, and were even unhappier when they learned why there was a delay. They walked away from the deal and are taking him to court. Because his sale fell through, he is now in the hole paying mortgages on 2 flats. I don't know if there was ever a fine levied against him, but I sure as heck hope so. Lesson of the story: you don't ever f*** with a man's kids. OP, I praise you for being a bigger person than I am, because if that man had ever touched my children without my permission, I would have beat the living hell out of him. I praise you for that and just getting your revenge in a very civil manner. Our second and final post for the day comes from Rural Rogue. No air conditioning? Enjoy the fines. Back in 1993, I had just graduated from college. Since there weren't any jobs anywhere near my hometown, I moved to the Dallas area. I had a small bit of money left from college, but I knew it wouldn't last. I found and rented the cheapest apartment that I could find. A bit of background on this apartment complex. It used to be a nice complex, and it used to be in a nice area. That was no longer the case. The area was completely run down, with most people either being unemployed, like me, or doing some sort of menial job. The actual apartment was not really an apartment. The original design for the complex had mainly 3-bedroom, 2-bath apartments. At some point, they took the master bedroom, one of the bathrooms, and one of the closets and made that into a separate apartment. They called it an efficiency. I'm sure some of you were reading that and trying to figure out where the kitchen was located. Short answer, it wasn't. The kitchen was the closet. It had been a small walk-in closet. They put an apartment-sized refrigerator in it with a microwave on top of it. That was the kitchen. I didn't particularly like it, but I was broke. What could I do? I was looking for jobs for a few months and having no luck. I spent much of my time in that little apartment. The trouble came in March. It started getting really hot. By mid-April, it felt like I was cooking during the day. My apartment had AC, but it was blowing nothing but hot air. I went to the manager to complain, and I was told that they didn't turn on the compressor until June. No way would I be able to make it to June. I had to do something. I found a way to keep cool. One of the few places with working air conditioning that didn't mind me loitering was the public library. We were actually close to a huge branch, so I could go grab a book and just sit there for hours, but it was still stifling when I went home. Since I was at the library anyway, I started doing research on apartment regulations. It wasn't too difficult. Heck, I had essentially done the same thing for years as a full-time student. It was just research. The housing codes were located in a row of large books, back before the internet. I had nothing better to do, so I started going through them. After a few days, I found some things that I thought might help and called the housing authority. They came right over to my apartment the next day. Infraction number 1. If the temperature within the apartment was above a certain level, air conditioning had to be available. I think it was 80 degrees, and it was 83 degrees in my apartment when they showed up. Infraction 2. All apartments, regardless of size, had to have a working stove. Remember, I only had a microwave, which was not considered a stove. Infraction 3. All apartments, regardless of size, had to have a working sink in the kitchen. And again, remember, I didn't have a sink in the kitchen. I had to wash the few dishes I had in the bathtub. The housing authority people said they'd take care of it and left. Within another week, I got a notice from the apartment that they were going to be putting in a stove and a sink. And best of all, the AC started getting cool. It doesn't end there though. I was there when the workers were putting in the stove and sink. I was playing some video game. One of the workers saw it and started up a conversation since he liked video games. I found out some interesting things. First, the wiring wouldn't handle the stove, so they had to do something to get it to work. They put one hole in my apartment, and I heard them putting some more holes in the apartment next door. Don't forget, those two apartments used to be the same apartment. The fuse box was in the other apartment. Second, the flooring in the closet was carpeting. That was deemed unsafe to put a stove on, so they had to tear it out, just in the closet, and put down some type of tile. Third, the closet did not have any place to attach the sink, so they had to go through the wall again to get to the bathroom to connect the plumbing in there. I'm unsure how that worked, since directly on the other side of the wall was the bathtub. There was no exposed plumbing there. All told, these changes cost about $10,000, including parts and labor. I'm going by what I was told. I have no direct knowledge, and the guy giving me this information was one of the regular workers, and not any sort of management. But I did find out one other thing. It wasn't just my apartment. It was all of the efficiency apartments. All 20 of them. If the numbers that I was given can be believed, that'd be approximately $200,000. All because it was hot. Edit. Since I forgot this part, I got a notice from the housing authority a few weeks after they finished updating the apartment. The notice mentioned fines being levied. I don't have any additional information on the number or the amount of fines, but based on what I've heard about the housing authority in later years, it was probably substantial. Edit again. In response to one of the comments, I was curious and went to look up this old apartment. In '93, when I was there, the apartment was $485 per month. Now it's $615 per month. So it's still incredibly cheap for the area. They've upgraded it a bit. Now the kitchen, i.e. the closet, has countertops and cabinets. There's a closet right off the living area. There's even a blurb on the website that says, all of our available homes come standard with air conditioning, fully equipped kitchens, ceiling fans, and carpeted living spaces. Of course, they don't say they were forced to add some of this stuff. Also, I was taken aback by the size. The apartment is 274 square feet. I remembered it being a tiny apartment, but I forgot how tiny. My question is, if these have been already existing apartments, how did they get passed with their inspections? Like, aren't there mandatory inspections like every few years for apartments and everything like that? How did they pass those? I'm confused. Well, alright my dashing dudes, that is going to do it for today's episode of r/ProRevenge. I hope you liked the stories, and if you did, I'll link them down in the description as always. And if you liked the video, subscribe, drop a like, and a comment down below what you'd like to see me read next. A humongous thank you to everyone who has subscribed to me over this journey I've been on. I can't thank y'all enough, and we've just passed 276 subscribers, and that makes me so happy. I can't wait to see how we're going to grow during this next few years, and see where it takes us. But with that being said, I will see you in the next video.